Quick reminder, happy hour this Thursday, October 17th, 4 to 7 p.m., maybe later. RSVP on Eventbrite. It's going to be at the congregation. I'd be glad to see you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to your Daily Detroit. You know, we take federal holidays off to give our tiny team a break. Monday was one of those. So on this Tuesday, October 15th, we are back at it. I am J.R. Stays, and even though it's not a Monday to kick off the week, I'm joined by none other than the illustrious Steve Freese. If you don't know, since you are new here, Steve is a freelance journalist for the New York Times, Newsweek, and many others, and writes the weekly newsletter for the Ann Arbor Observer. Steve, I can actually believe what happened this week happened since we last talked. I'm going to roll a clip from the Detroit Economic Club. People might have heard of it.
The whole country is going to be like, you want to know the truth? It'll be like Detroit. Our whole country will end up being like Detroit if she's your president. You're going to have a mess on your hands.
I ended up watching the entire thing in 2 sittings, Steve. I have not watched an entire Trump speech since 2020. This is not something I do for fun. So let's start with your thoughts.
Actually, now that you say it, I don't think I have ever sat through an entire Trump speech. Maybe his 2016 convention speech, maybe, but I don't see the point.
Well, you know what was wild about this, listening to this? I remember his 2016 escalator speech, and it had the same themes in this about tariffs and automakers and immigrants. Is the exact same thing, but more wide and delusional and unclear and scrambled than when he came down the escalator in 2016. But it was crazy to see the similarities, how much it was exactly the same topics.
Well, yeah, he does repeat himself. He's been doing that for 10 years. But look, I can't imagine that anybody thinks it's a good idea to go to a city and attack the city and insult the city and have that be essentially the only media that comes out of it. It may please a certain wingnut part of the Republican base, the hardcore Trumpers, but I don't even think that the suburban Detroiters feel that negatively about the city of Detroit these days. I think that most people in this region, they probably think it's gotten better than it really has, because what they see is, a clean downtown and all of this construction and all of this sort of upscale stuff going on, the station. And then if you really care, if you're a suburbanite but you want to be a Detroiter, the way you're a Detroiter is you support Detroit sports teams. And we've been having a pretty good run. We crushed the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not that familiar with how good the Cowboys are, but I don't remember ever seeing the Detroit Lions crushing a name brand team in quite a long time.
I mean, it's rare. Even in the NFL in general, crushing teams is rare because there's so much parity in the league. It was a huge thing. That message about Detroit would have played 15 or 20 years ago in a different world. I mean, I don't know if people remember. Some listeners will not remember, but people like L. Brooks Patterson, the former Oakland County executive, right, said put up a fence and throw corn over the top for Detroit, and all kinds of other things that were just racist and terrible and bigoted. And that was a common belief by a lot of people who were the first generation who left, or sometimes the generation immediately after that, where it's like Detroit is this forbidden, terrible place with a lot of these feelings based on some pretty awful beliefs. Nowadays, I don't think it's the same thing, but I do think this is a reflection of the media bubble that some folks live in, especially on the right. Because I'll tell you, years ago, I used to work for the Detroit Regional News Hub as a concierge for national and international journalists. And I could always tell when it was a right-winger calling, because the thing is that it has been a Republican talking point, no matter how good or bad Detroit is, because it's ran by Democrats and because it's black, and I'm just going to be honest with that. There is a thread of racism in here without a doubt.
Thread?
I'm
thread.
being kind here. But yeah, I
It's
would
like a
always,
ball of yarn.
it's a whole sweater of racist. It's a whole racist clothing line. But I could always tell the right wingers because, they would make back in the day, early YouTube days or whatever, they would make these videos, or you'd see right wing media always come in and look for the worst things about Detroit. And it doesn't matter to this group of people how good Detroit does, the facts on the ground, or that like billionaires who are often Republicans and millionaires are investing in Detroit who are often Republicans. When you're in a media bubble, when you're in your own little talking point zone, all you know is that. I think that's part of like the only thing that Donald Trump consumes is that right-wing stuff. The only thing is people consume. There's no understanding of any sort of like normalcy of people just living their lives and trying to function. As I said, I'm not surprised, but it is kind of appalling and rude, and it speaks to the character of somebody to be invited to speak somewhere and then crap on them. If that's what you do, like that's the kind of thing, if you did that in real life, if you spoke incoherently at someone's house and then just, insulted their family, you would be never invited again and your number would be deleted because that's not what actual humans do.
Donald Trump has been doing this a lot, though. This is now a pattern where he goes to a place or he goes in front of a group of voters and he somehow kicks them in the nuts. He's done it to the Jewish groups. He's done it to black groups. He's done it to Colorado, and the list goes on. That like it's become a regular thing for him to, like you say, crap on whatever the group is that he's in front of. And the thing that's so distressing about it is for those of us who do that, Donald Trump wants to be a dictator and wants to take the limits of the president's power to its ultimate extreme. This is a list he's building. He's building a list of the things he doesn't like that he decides are not quite American. And I guess Jews who vote for Democrats are not the right kind of American. We live in a moment where this obviously can go two ways. And if it goes the Trump way, God, I mean, I just don't know what happens. And I feel like that's sort of the thing. Like, I don't know if Kamala Harris is going to be a good president or a bad president. She might be a terrible president. I don't know. But I know that most of the familiar things we know about the American government will remain intact. And that is being promised not to be the case if it goes the other direction. And gosh, it really does get me anxious. It really does worry me.
I wish that this conversation was more about like which of the policies or the visions as opposed to like a bare question about competency.
No, I'm not saying about competency. I think that Donald Trump or the people who he appoints will be incredibly competent at dismantling the country, dismantling the federal government. The amount of power he has, he can, in fact, get rid of an awful lot of things. He can, in fact, decide to court-martial journalists or a whole variety of people. He can do all that. It may end up getting litigated, but he can try, and he seems like he will.
That is something that I think about on a pretty regular basis. People don't seem to realize that kind of includes people like, who are talking on these microphones. And you're hearing right now. Now, one thing I will say is that Detroit is a very prideful city. And I know that I've been here. I mean, I was born here. I've been here most of my adult life. I split my childhood here. Crapping on Detroit when you're trying to peel off some voters, to like help your margins or whatever in the state, I can see a lot of low information voters seeing this and going, okay, I was maybe going to think about staying home, or I was going to think about you. But if you're going to say this, then no. This made such the rounds in mainstream media and in local media that there's no way you didn't see this. And it's like, well, that's like, okay, well, you're just going to crap on where I live. I'm not sure I'm going to be so motivated to support you.
I haven't seen whether they've made ads out of it or not.
Harris did a huge one. Heroic voiceovers, and it was all over, at least here in the city.
Okay. Yeah, it's very weird. It's a strange approach. I understand that he has a certain instinct about where the Democrats live and where the Republicans live, and there's the good and there's the not good. And that's how he views it. And it's all based on party. It doesn't matter if the Democratic mayor is a particularly conservative Democratic mayor or a liberal one. We read this week with I think it was the Woodward book about Trump and Biden, and it was, I believe that was the source of the reporting about how he didn't want to give disaster relief aid to certain parts of California because he thought they were Democrats, but then he was told, no, this is Orange County, they're Republicans, so he released the money.
Ugh.
This is something that came up about a few days ago. It's a very, very strange and very sad way to approach the country because he would withhold aid from a Democratic area that was suffering. He wants everybody to think that Biden is doing the same for the folks that have been hurt by these hurricanes. It's not true.
I put this in context. Everybody says about like the city of Detroit, but I would put it in the context that, that means a large chunk of Oakland County would be Democrat, a huge chunk of Wayne County. Most of Metro Detroit is now, more blue than it is red. And those kind of politics are dangerous.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see where it goes. I mean, did anybody get around to asking Mike Rogers if he thinks that Detroit is the worst fate that the country could possibly experience? I mean, did that happen? I wonder why some of the Trump questions are not being forced on the Republican nominees for various offices.
Well, and there hasn't been as much conversation about these local candidates. And let's talk about it real quick, because I watched that debate between Elissa Slotkin and Mike Rogers over the week. I don't have too much to say about it that I haven't already, except I feel like it was like a big run to the moderate middle. Mike Rogers tried to backpedal some of his positions on women's rights, or basically his strong feelings against them. And electric vehicles came up because apparently electric vehicle production is now political, and driving electric vehicle is about what party you're in, which somebody better tell Elon that. But anyway, thoughts?
Yeah, that is so weird. It's so weird that we're talking about electric cars and Elon Musk is a Trumper. The whole thing just is so bizarre.
Do electric vehicles ever come up as something around people that you talk to as like a topic?
Look, electric vehicles do rely on a lot of foreign parts. It can't be made entirely in the U.S. It's not here. There are rare earth metals that come from all over the world, and there's some that come from China and can really only be sourced from China. And so that does give other parts of the world a certain amount of control over the transportation industry. But it's not that big of a segment yet. And the marketplace is doing a thing. People are still nervous about how to make sure that they're not going to run out of juice while they're driving one of these things. The range anxiety has come down a little, but it's still a big deal. The federal government did add these huge incentives to lower the prices in the Inflation Reduction Act. So, and I think Elon Musk is a little sore about it because I believe that it may not apply to Tesla. I don't know. He's a strange bird. I mean, the guy who built a fortune on tax credits is now talking about how awful the government is. You have to really dig to get at that. And electric vehicles are not the reason why car companies are moving factories to other parts of the country or other parts of the North American region. Those two things are not related. That's happening because of labor costs and maybe tax incentives and stuff like that. And Donald Trump did not have a solution for that when he was president. And he doesn't really seem to have an articulated one for what he would do if he gets to be president again.
You were looking at some numbers. I thought it was interesting around Dearborn and Hamtramck. And one thing that you noted in our kind of text chat back and forth is by how much Biden actually won Hamtramck. And in my mind, because, everyone's talking about Mayor Halib and the endorsement and all this other stuff. But number one, I wonder if there isn't some sort of change coming in voting on the other side, looking at what he's endorsed versus like how people voted for Biden. Like I could see a change in percentages, of course. But when you shared with me by how much Biden won, I'm like, even if it moves a significant amount, it'd still be majority Democrat.
Hamtramck, for example, I think what I saw was that there were about 7,500 votes there for president in 2020, and it went 86%, I think it was, for Biden. It was an overwhelming number. It was almost 9-1. That's a huge number. That's an extreme advantage. This idea that Harris is going to, slip and fall and lose all of these Arab and Muslim votes, and it's going to cost her Michigan. Look, anything can cost her anything because it is supposedly an extremely close race. I say supposedly because, again, I give the same caveat every week. I find the polling to be frustrating, and the reporting on the polling is extremely frustrating, and I find the polling itself to be just doubtful. I can't seem to get my head around it. I think NBC had a poll today that showed that Kamala Harris had a 5-point lead nationally a couple of weeks ago, and now it's tied. Mm-hmm. I mean, this doesn't make any sense to me. It's just irrational. I just don't buy it. But it does feel like it's an extremely close race, and it does feel like anything could tip things. But when you're talking about a vote total that small in a place like Hamtramck, for example, I want to see Democratic candidates in those places. I really want to see Kamala Harris come out with some sort of a articulated plan of support for Palestinian people in a way that I guess doesn't offend Jewish voters, I suppose.
Is that possible?
Yeah. It is. I mean, the fact of the matter is that national polling shows that most Americans have a lot of sympathy for what's happened to the Palestinians. It's complicated, right? And what you really hope for is a leader who can explain how complicated it is and break it down for the listener and make people understand that there are two sides or three sides or many sides to this. I do understand how it could be all that controversial for Kamala Harris to stand up and say, look, I support Israel, I support its right to exist, I want a two-state solution, and I am incredibly aggrieved over the death and destruction that is happening in Gaza and the humanitarian needs there. And I understand that there are a lot of Americans, particularly young people, who are very upset about it. And I'm going to appoint a Palestinian liaison, and we are going to, on day one, make sure that we are doing everything we can to get a ceasefire and get the hostages back and separate Hamas from Palestinians. I mean, I'm just making this up as I go, but there's much, much smarter people than me and give her the words that will thread this needle, but she's not even trying to. She hasn't even tried.
I do think that's important. I will say, though, when it comes to covering this, it feels like you can find any story that you want, whatever you come in with your predispositions, you can find any story to agree with you. You sent me a few things, some listeners sent me things, and honestly, I can't make heads or tails of it. But I do agree that sometimes you just got to stand up and try and put yourself out there, and there will be a lot of people who will respect you just for doing that.
Yeah. I mean, look, Yom Kippur was over the weekend, and this past week was the period between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, also included October 7th, the anniversary of the Hamas attack. And, you can go to 10 different synagogues, and you could have heard 10 different rabbis talking about different elements of this crisis. Jewish people don't all agree on all of these things. And there is room to be concerned about people who are ostensibly your enemy or whatever. And it's well within the teaching of the Jewish faith. I'm Jewish, okay? And I'm going to tell you that my favorite part of the Passover story and this Passover Seder is after Moses and his people get through the Red Sea, and the Red Sea closes in on the ensuing Egyptians who are trying to catch them. and all these people die in the water. The Israelis are celebrating on the banks of the Red Sea, and God gets angry with them and says, my creatures are perishing, and you sing praises. Now, I'm not a religious person, and I know that the man did not pick up a stick and make the sea part. I know all of that is silly, to me anyway. But I like the moral of it. I like the lesson, and the lesson is even your enemies are people, and they deserve respect and love and concern and humanity. And I think that it's a very Jewish principle that I don't think is that hard for somebody like Kamala Harris or Doug Emhoff to articulate.
Yeah.
Wow. Bible study with Steve.
Actually, one of the reasons I didn't say much is because I was truly, honestly listening. I thought that was actually really interesting. Why don't we end with something in your neck of the woods, something we probably wouldn't have talked about, except that, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson weighed into it. Let me set the table really quick for folks. Ann Arbor voters are facing a decision on the upcoming ballot that would shake up how elections are done in Michigan's fifth largest city. Proposition C aims to eliminate primary elections and remove party affiliations from local ballots. Supporters argue this change would increase voter participation by focusing on the November election when more residents, including students, are around. They think it will force candidates to better explain their positions rather than relying on party labels. This is paired with Proposition D, which would establish a fair elections fund using a very small percentage, I think 0.3% of the city of Ann Arbor's general fund, to publicly finance the campaigns for mayor and city council. Advocates say it would take the influence of money out of local elections. It also has detractors and some who say it'd be illegal. We would probably not be covering this, but Jocelyn Benson came out strong against both. Steve, this is your neck of the woods, so I'll defer to you. But for context, I will share that, and I cover these on a regular basis, City of Detroit elections for municipal office do not have party labels. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this one.
Ann Arbor and even the county at large, Washtenaw County, is so Democratic and so blue that the primaries are the election. And what ends up happening is that, the incumbents have a huge advantage if they're Democrats, and there's no competition. And now in the city of Ann Arbor, you got a city council that's dominated by a strain of Democratic thought that is very pro-growth and very pro-business. And there are a lot of folks in Ann Arbor who are frustrated by this. And they're looking for a way in essentially a one-party county, a one-party city, to open up the possibility of who might win a race. And I was under the impression that Democrats, generally speaking, are in favor of this kind of thing. They certainly were in favor of it in a place like Alaska, where they switched to ranked choice voting, and all of a sudden Democrats started getting elected to things up there, and moderate Republicans were winning elections instead of crazy wingnuts. And so I find it very strange. I don't understand why Jocelyn Benson is opening her mouth about this. I don't get what she has at stake in terms of who elected to the city council in Ann Arbor. It just seems like a strange moment for her to be stepping in where essentially, she's been a leading force towards making sure that elections are safe and secure, and advocating for democratic values with a small d, advocating for the system. And here you have a couple of ideas that are intended to make it easier for people to participate in an election, to run for office, to force people to be less polarized. And she's against it. I find it strange.
Well, I'm going to add some context to this. Do you know who Jocelyn Benson's husband is?
I do, and I can't remember. He works for Stephen Roth.
Yep. Ryan Friedrichs is the former chief development officer for the city of Detroit. He's registered as a lobbyist, last I heard, for the related companies. And of course, that's a very pro-development kind of situation. So it wouldn't be surprising to me to see something that if you're, I didn't realize this be framed as like development versus not pro-development. And if it is that frame, then I can't help but think a little bit here that there are some thoughts here. I mean, there's not always a direct connection, but it's something where she's always been tied to very pro-development forces. And, as I said, her husband's a lobbyist. So that maybe doesn't surprise me so much.
Well, the other thing about that is, I did interview and I did profile Jocelyn Benson for Our Magazine a couple of years ago. And I remember Stephen Ross telling me at the time that if she didn't win re-election, she was running against Christine Caramo, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If she didn't win re-election, he would hire her. And she does have that sort of background. And I believe she's very likely to run for governor.
I think there's a very good chance she's running for governor. I think this is going to be a race that includes her. What I think will happen is that Mike Duggan, this will be his last term as Detroit mayor. Again, that's what I think will happen. What I keep hearing rumors are happening. And sometimes I go to events where literally a deputy mayor will slip and talk about, Duggan's last term. That happened a few months ago. It's something I was at. So I think this is going to be a Duggan, Benson, and then some other folks kind of gubernatorial race on the Democratic side. I think we're not going to see any announcements of anything until after this election.
Mm-hmm. What about Garland Gilchrist? Is he going to run for Detroit mayor?
Some people would like him to, but I wonder if he's got eyes other places. I don't know where he's going to end up. He's got a lot of options, I feel like. He could stay in government. I feel like he's bright enough that if he wanted to go make some money again, he used to work at Microsoft and he's a really bright guy. Where do you go from lieutenant governor?
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to about Michigan history and politics, but have we had lieutenant governors who have immediately succeeded a completed term of the governor that they served under? I mean, I know there are plenty of lieutenant governors who have become governor because the governor, I don't know, died or took another job or ran for something else or whatever. Are there any Kamala Harrises of Michigan? I don't know the answer. I don't know if being a lieutenant governor is a great launch pad for a gubernatorial race or not. Also, at least up until now, the parties swap governors every 8 years for a very long time now. So it'll be interesting to see if the state is really as blue as it feels. Okay, we're talking about the election 2 years from now, not this one. So maybe we should get back to what we're talking about. But I don't know. I just found that her sticking her nose, it just seemed unnecessary. Unless maybe they have polling showing that these props are popular, because there are a lot of elected Democrats who are lining up against it, but most of them hold office here in the county, so it makes more sense.
I don't know. Maybe there's something that she has not shared or whatever that makes all of this add up, but it feels like a very local thing to get involved in.
So did you think that there was anything in the Elissa Slotkin, Mike Rogers debate that will have any legs? Is it that bit where she nails him on not being in the state and voting in Florida and whatever else she said about him?
That whole story actually made it all the way to Maddow.
Yeah.
Right? And that kind of surprised me a little bit.
I'm sorry, all the way to Maddow? I mean, I'm sorry, but that doesn't sound like it's a particularly long road.
Well, no, I just like local stuff like that doesn't always percolate up to the top. You know what I mean? And for that to do that, I think is kind of interesting. I know that listeners were very frustrated at you for drawing any sort of equivalency between the two of them. And I saw a lot of that, not just online, but kind of like in feedback in general. I mean, I know a lot of our listeners are going to lean blue as it is, but it is interesting to see, because I think to see people who are like, does it affect the average voter, or is it something that's really good for like rallying the left and raising money? I don't even know how much this race is even on like the average voter's like radar at this point.
She has the choice issue.
Yes. That was the biggest difference in their debate to some extent, was the choice issue, because It was two people that if you're watching that debate as somebody who's on the farther left of the screen or of the scene, you're going to be pretty frustrated, honestly, because this was a very centrist versus right debate.
It'll be interesting to see how that race turns out, because everybody is ringing so many alarm bells about all these different wrinkles of Democratic demographics. It spins your head to, every day there's some bit of information just that the Democrats are letting this whole thing slip away. And I just believe that anything is changing. Like, I think that the race is exactly where it's been for weeks. And in that context, I think that Kamala Harris is ahead. I think she's ahead more than the polls show, but maybe I'm wrong. I have a theory that I'm sure we'll never be able to find out, but I believe that there are a lot of women voters in rural areas who may tell a pollster they're going to vote for Trump, but they're not going to. They just don't want their husbands to know how they're going to vote. I just think that there is a shy Kamala voter out there that's not showing up in polling.
I've seen multiple people talk about this, including a pollster that I follow on Instagram, but I've seen other people talk about this too. And it's that white women voted for Trump in 2020. And if white women voted for Kamala in 2024, all these marginal things that I don't want to demean them, but like the 10,000 votes here and the 20,000 votes there in this community, all of it won't matter, because that would be a huge enough. That's just such a huge chunk to move that. If they were to move from, 55% Trump to, 53, 54% Harris, that if that switches, all these other like side quests and smaller groups, none of those storylines will matter, because it'd just be an overwhelming, like a very strong showing for Harris if that demographic changes. And that's something that, it makes a lot of sense to me.
I did want to tell you, I got a question on Threads from one of our listeners asking us about this question about, he was very interested to hear what you know about Harris Wall's online target marketing campaign. So the online targeting. And he says, I assume that the message I'm getting in West Bloomfield is not statewide. No, I don't think there is a statewide message.
No,
I don't think anybody does that anymore in a state this big and diverse. I think you talk about farm issues in the central part of the state. You talk about urban and violence or crime or jobs in the cities. You talk about choice everywhere there are women, which is everywhere, and men who love them. I mean,
Well, you used to have the targeting of the TV station geographic area, but as somebody who's bought a lot of digital advertising over the years and previous jobs and whatever, like what I see on my YouTube and my Instagram is completely different than my friends, than even my roommates. Like I've compared with friends of mine. It is a completely different message, because you can go in there and look at, say, my YouTube, like not me personally, but people like me, and say, oh, well, what's this geographic area? They know I'm in the city of Detroit. They know I'm a dude. They know I'm in they know all these things, and they can actually put ads directly down the hole for that specific thing. And that is something that the other side, the Republicans, are definitely doing as well. And I'll tell you, like, I have female friends I've talked to who get more Harris ads. I get more Tim Walz ads.
Huh. What do you mean? What is a Tim Walz ad?
Him like at rallies and being a good guy and loving his dog.
I saw the dog thing, but that was in my email, and I thought, wow, that's where we're at. I'm getting email ostensibly written by Tim Walz's dog.
I mean, it's exactly targeted at me, sir. I mean, that's me, 100%. I watched the entire walk with Tim Walls, walk with Scout Walls on We Rate Dogs. And so I think,
Scout.
yeah, Scout. Yep, Scout's the dog, talking about, the things that he's learned about being a dog owner that he's going to bring to the vice presidency.
God, there was a hot minute where my husband wanted to name our son Scout. And the only reason I thought about it was because I was hesitant about naming him Nevada, because I thought that might be a little strange. But it was more meaningful to us, so we did it. But I am so glad we did not not name our dog Scout. Name our kid, our son, our human Scout.
I'm sure there's some Scouts out there.
Oh, there absolutely are. Did I ever tell you that when I was at Politico and I was covering technology and politics in the 2012 election, I went to I believe it's called NBT Van. I'm forgetting now, but it's the company that has the biggest voter like file, and everybody, all the different campaigns buy the demographic information from them. It may be different now, but at the time, this was the sort of the warehouse, the biggest company that sold this kind of data to campaigns. And I was doing a story about them, and I asked them to look me up to see what they knew about me, and it was fascinating because they knew all the things that you would expect, right? They knew my age, they knew what party I had voted in primaries, how often I voted. They knew, like you said, they knew I was a dog owner. They knew I was gay. They knew a lot. They knew a lot of things. They even knew I was a Mets fan. But the thing, the thing that I found particularly fascinating, and you have to think about where they get all of that information, right? But the thing that I found particularly fascinating was that I was among the people who apparently there was a track record that I opened my mail. I open my hard mail. Like, I go to the mailbox and I open it, and I guess they know this because I respond to things like, charitable solicitations. I guess I don't have any idea how they know, but it is true. I love the mail. I love getting mail. I love going to the mailbox. It is a magical thing for me. I try to make it seem like magic for my kids that you open the box and there's stuff in there every day or most days and stuff. But I thought, and I can see how useful that is for a campaign to know where bother to spend money sending somebody a mailer. And I'm getting a lot of mailers right now. I don't know if everybody's getting them, but I'm getting them. I'm getting all sides, and all kinds of campaigns, and a lot of Mike Rogers, some Elissa Slotkin, I guess, not as much, but I wouldn't waste her money in Ann Arbor, like.
I get almost nothing here in Detroit.
Uh-huh.
I get
But
Trump stuff. I'll get Trump stuff, but I get almost nothing here in Detroit because everybody's kind of like settled everything out. I know you mentioned about that voter data. One time I was working around direct marketing, and I found out about my profile with direct marketing, and they had me down as a black man who liked aquariums.
Okay.
I don't know how. Well, I'm not a black man. And I will, like, I like a fish screensaver, but I like pets I can cuddle. Like, no offense to the fish people out there. You're great. You're wonderful. But I'm going to put all that effort in. I need some emotional, like, response back. And maybe the fish can do that for you. And that's great if it does. But, like, I can't walk a fish.
I hate aquariums. I don't understand them. The other thing I was going to say about that was the Detroit Tigers kind of crumbled. They were very close, and then they lost the thread, and they went unconscious, and they ended their season. And all I can say about that is the New York Mets are still playing.
Is this your pitch for everyone to become a temporary Mets fan?
No, but it is my pitch for Detroit fans to raise their expectations, because after the Detroit Lions, the last season, and after the Tigers season that just ended, I saw a lot of writing and the free press about, well, wasn't that a great season? Everybody was real satisfied by getting one or two rounds into the playoffs. And I'm just here to tell you that as a Mets fan, as a New Yorker, if you don't win the whole thing, it doesn't matter. And Detroit people need to embrace that. Apparently, this is an excellent Detroit Lions team. So if they don't win the Super Bowl, you should be disappointed. You shouldn't be like, well, that was a great year. We got close. Yay. No. You have to want to win it all every year. If the Mets go to the World Series and they don't win, they're still losers.
I like this for a reason, and the reason being is that I really feel we should hold our ownership a bit more accountable. When we did, we saw what Sheila Hamp Ford can do and what leadership matter and how much leadership matters with the Lions and getting the right coach and everything else. Things looked up, and I want to see that because I am terrified of Tigers owner Chris Ilitch looking at this and being like, I don't need to spend any money. We can just try to do the same thing again.
Yep.
When it's like, no, you know what? We could spend some targeted money. We are so far underneath the cap. We could bring in some great people to get it really over the top. And I want to see that culture of winning in Detroit. I think we should increase our expectations. I love watching the sports towns, New York, Philly, St. Louis with baseball, by the way. St. Louis is crazy about their Cardinals.
Mm-hmm.
Chicago to some extent. I believe Detroit's a great sports city. We've got all these major sports teams, lots of history behind it. I want us to embrace a culture of doing better and being like pushing for that. So yeah, you know what? I'm on board, Steve. I like this.
Wow. I guess since they didn't have a Monday podcast, you're giving them a little extra here, huh?
Well, if you want to yell at us, dailydetroit@gmail.com. That's dailydetroit@gmail.com. Or I'm on Threads at dailydetroit. Always want to hear from you. Steve Freeze, always good to talk with you.
Yeah. Talk to you next week.
Absolutely. And if you're still tuned in, we do have a happy hour on Thursday at the Congregation in Detroit, starting at 4 p.m., running till 7 p.m. or whatever people want to stick around. I've got the link up on Eventbrite. We've had some great response so far for people wanting to come. Would love to see you out there at a great venue. With that, I am J.R. Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll see you around Detroit.